Welcome, everyone, back to Cat's Eye on the Future, the show where we take a look at the energies that may be coming soon into your world and your future via the lens of using psi cards and Germanic runes. This week's show will be another card and rune reading about current events, followed by a question asked by one of our listeners. Before we get started, as always, a disclaimer. All readings used on this show are for entertainment purposes only. But, like any form of entertainment, they may be used for informational purposes when you make your own personal decisions. Now that that's out of the way, we have two really interesting readings this week. So let's get started with the first one. This week, I asked our current events question this way. What are the most important energies and/or events likely to be coming up for the week of September 23rd to September 29th, 2013? Now, you can find these cards at my website if you want to follow along at home. Just look the cards for episode 18. I'll also try to describe them to some degree for those of you who can't see them. But looking at these cards, the very first thing I notice is that we seem to be moving from a time period that was dominated by the raw emotions of the beast of the past week to a time period that's going to be heavily influenced by the sun and all things solar. That is because we not only start out the reading with the sun card itself, but we finish the reading with the sun rune herself. So we not only have the card that influences the rest of the reading as the sun in all of his magnificent aspects, but we finish reading with the sun in all of her strong and powerful aspects as well. The sun being male in the card deck, which is, like many traditional occult systems, it uses that male imagery. But of course, we've talked about before how the sun is female, the goddess Suna, in the Norse Germanic worldview, which encompasses the runes. So we have the male and female sun together. This is really important. The beast is thankfully nowhere to be seen in this reading. And since I'm having to record this show early this week, I'm recording it on Friday rather than late on Saturday or even early Sunday, I may not even be aware of all the manifestations that are coming up the beast during the end of this week when he's most heavily influenced. Although I have done a weekly and weekend, reading for my blog, and it showed that things were already, we had the rune Daguj, which is the sun at dawn. We didn't see any really, we saw more entrapment energy than we saw raging emotional energy. So it appears to me that we're already sort of moving out of beast phase. But, you know, as I've described before, runes and cards, and especially the energies they're reading, don't always follow exactly a human calendar or time frame. So we could still have another beast or two appearance before this is all over. But thankfully, I think the worst of that, just emotional, illogical, unending, stampeding energy is hopefully fading away already. Those of you following along at my blog know that on Monday morning now, to review, here at Irish time, I pulled the moon card and the Kenaj rune. And the moon card, of course, is the unconscious, and the Kenaj rune is sort of, I sometimes call it the sideways volcano. It's the boil or the torch, and the boil is, or volcano is erupting. And I predicted that it would likely there would be an erupting or explosive situation coming from the depths of the unconscious or the hidden world this past week. Of course, just a few hours later, we got a mentally ill shooter erupting out in Washington, D.C. and killing people. Rumor is he may have lost it from the sounds of a copying machine. That's just such an expression of the beast energy. Is somebody hearing voices, having something normal and just maybe slightly irritating most of the time that just sets off the beast and lets him rampage. We don't know for certain that that's what happened, but we do know that that is a perfect expression of energy. I even mentioned that if the beast appeared, the same advice I gave here on the show I gave in my early Monday morning blog, which was not to bother with trying to reason with the beast, that the only solutions were to either use diversion, to run away, or stop it cold in its tracks. Running it over a cliff works too, metaphorically, but that's part of stopping it. Depending on where a person was on that day, these really were the only recourses that people had. And until the police got there and were able to essentially shoot and kill or stop the man-beast, he was just going to go on stampeding and trying to destroy anyone in his path. So people who could manage to get out of the way, some of them made it. A lot of people, unfortunately, were not so lucky, and he managed to get them. This horrific event was almost a perfect description of last week's energies in a nutshell. On Tuesday and Wednesday, we saw morphing back to themes of following the money in the blog and economics being in the gun barrel. On Tuesday, I predicted the stock market might make a big jump either up or down. It was hard to tell which, but there was definitely the energy there for movement, which it did on Wednesday, rallying to the highest number of points ever. And remember, when energies come into something on any given day, there's about a 24 to 48 hour period that they might manifest. Just like our weekly energy readings may sometimes begin a little early and go a little late. It just depends on the energies themselves. So to have something like that happen within 24 hours, it's pretty impressive. Of course, a lot of other economic factors were being reflecting a very different type of stuff going on behind the scenes, because we all know, at least most educated people, that there does seem to be a certain amount of manipulation with the stock market. So the mere fact that they shot up real high on one day, maybe to the highest point ever, no longer necessarily means a whole lot, other than certain parties are very happy with situations going on in the U.S. on any given day. In that case, I believe it was an announcement by the Fed, something about interest rates that I don't totally understand. But obviously, some of the wealthy aspects, people, corporations behind the stock market thought it was a great idea. There were indications that other areas of the economy were not so happy with it. Now, on Thursday, which is when I'm actually writing most of this, again, 3 or 4 days early, our internet server is down. So the Irish news isn't saying much about the world at all. So I can only assume that things are not any much worse than yesterday. And so far, there are no clear candidates for the beastly mother or the mother card. But that could change before the time period ends on Sunday. Well, now it's Friday, and my internet is back, and I can get a little more news. And quite frankly, the only thing that I can really see so far maybe a touch on Hillary Clinton and the whole Benghazi hearings, but I don't really want to get too much into politics. I'm not saying that Hillary Clinton, who is just a female politician, is necessarily the beast herself, but that kind of woman-controlled or feminine-observed energy, she was in charge of the situation, and she is being investigated, or at least the situation is being looked at by Congress or a congressional committee. So that could be part of what's going on. I think there's probably more to it than that, and I think it does not just involve her, but I think that has to be considered as possibly part of the story. Either that, or it's also totally possible last week I just didn't quite get what the cards were trying to tell me. Maybe we'll have some more information before the weekend is over and the time period is actually officially up. So catching up now towards the coming time period, as I previously mentioned, we have the male sun card as our starting card for this reading. Because of copyright issues, I cannot play the Beatles song, Here Comes the Sun. But throughout this reading, you can hear that in the back of your head, complete with la 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 la, because that is really what this reading is all about. Now, the sun card shows a happy group of people dancing around a maypole on one side, and then a harvest theme, it's ready to be cut and stored on the other. In other words, the two sides of the warmer periods of spring to early fall that would have been one of the two major seasons of the traditional agricultural calendar. We think of 4 seasons in most places in the northern hemisphere, and even some places in the south. But most of the ancestors, it was really in the northern Europe anyway, it was really summer and winter. They understood spring and fall, but your real issues were, when are you laboring, either planting, growing, or harvesting? Or when are you attending other tasks because it's too cold and wet, or the season is over and you have to concentrate on other things? Now, in the temperate zones, this pretty much is the way the seasons actually work, if I just explain. And they may be reversed going north to south, but there is still the movement from planting to harvest, sort of. We don't have the A-Ra rune in this reading, but those 2 V's of the A-Ra rune, which is like 2 Kenajas together, sort of like a yin-yang, they talk about that sort of swing back from summer and winter. So the sun itself now can represent many things. Most notably, in its version in the male sun card, it's the light of day. It's an open situation. It's warmth. It's heat. It can be drought. It can be strength. And it's anything solar, nuclear, or electric. But especially nuclear, in the sense of nuclear fusion and fission being little suns. We'll get back to that one later. The sun card, now it's being followed by the birth card. And you may remember if you were listening last week, the birth card suggests something new being born or coming into being. It's all about new things, new situations, creativity, creation of new things, including actual births and fertility, babies, people, babies in plants, babies in animals. Again, very agricultural, but also even more primal than that, because it involves, even if you're a hunter, you want to see more babies born. You want the tribe to increase, and you want the animal tribes to increase because they help feed you. The same way with little plants. It's a very, very ancient concept. It's hard to know if the birth card is connected directly to the sun, in which case it is likely there is about to be a new situation, or birth, about something regarding the sun, or the things that are under the sun's influence, again, like droughts, solar panels, nuclear power, or maybe even a solar flare. Now, since I wrote this on Thursday, there have been reports that both that the sun is inexplicably in a very minimal situation. There are almost no sunspots during a time period when it was expected to be a solar maximum. So to some degree, this sort of news is already there, but also hints that some solar flares might be building. Solar flares can happen anytime. They may be more likely when you have a lot of other solar events going on, but they can occur even on a very quiet sun. So we're not even in this time period yet, and the sun is already becoming a major, major topic of news stories and conversation. In purely science terms, as I said, the sun is getting very close to its 12 years or so, when it might also flip its magnetic poles. Now, this shouldn't be anything scary. I've seen some scare stories on this, but it happens every 11 or 12 years. It's just a normal part of the way suns do things, or our sun does things. We don't know how other suns do things, but how our sun does things. And the thing is that because it's maybe getting ready to do this, it usually happens at the maximum of the solar sunspot cycle, at least as people have been observing it. But it doesn't have to. But if it did occur this week, if the poles of the sun actually flipped, this would, again, another really strong part of this energy would be played out. It doesn't mean it will, but it would be perfectly good timing in an energy sense. And a similar thing could happen if there were like new sunspots or storms that form suddenly, solar storms that we weren't expecting. However, the birth card could actually be about the next card as well. That's the stranger. The stranger is shown as a man standing in a doorway. He's sort of half in light and half in shadow. It's never really very bright, but you can see better one half of him than the other. This is a very Jungian figure. He's literally the stranger at the door. He can be an unknown part of a person's self, and often is in the case of a private reading with a client. He echoes to some degree the unconsciousness of the moon card. He's part of the unconscious world that we saw on Monday. Or he can be a new element, a new person, or a new situation coming into a person's life, or in this case, perhaps the limelight of current events. So this week, we very likely have the birth or coming forth of a new person, such a new situation, or maybe even a new idea that is either very new or perhaps actually very strange. There's no reason why it can't be both. But it is very worth keeping an eye out for he, she, they, it. Maybe right in the middle of the reading here, it could be connected to the sun, and it may be connected to the last two cards. In other words, the card at the beginning sort of flavors the whole reading, but the card in the middle is often a real pivot point too, because things radiate out from it. Now, what are these last two cards? They're the liar and the work card, or the card that usually means mundane work, jobs and employment. along with the Liar card. That's the distracting actor we've seen so many times before, holding up his puppet to block the man behind the curtain. He doesn't want you to see the man behind the curtain. He wants to dance around. He shows a false face. He shows a false mask. And he's all about deception, distraction, false directions, out-and-out lies, facades, and just kind of being generally sneaky and not upfront about things. Given the Liar card's position next to the other cards in the middle, it could suggest that whatever the stranger is, he's not totally upfront, or perhaps even a false person, situation, or idea. Or, even if he's up front, it's an idea, he's the stranger himself or itself is not necessarily, anything wrong with it. It may be that there are going to be lies, deceptions, distractions about either the stranger or about, say, possibly the situation about jobs, employment, working conditions, work being done, or projects that need to have work done on them. I immediately think of, say, perhaps the Japanese government and the electric company saying that something will be done about their nuclear plant. In fact, today, again, after this was written, the Japanese prime minister saying that he wanted the entire plant taken down. Well, that's work that needs to be done. Only time will tell whether that turns out to be a real intention or something that's just being said for the benefit of the public. But it's exactly the kind of we're not really sure situation that you'd expect to see with that kind of energy. Again, this week seems to be a time when the energy may be really flipping over as of Friday, Saturday, rather than waiting until Monday to manifest, which since the beast had been primarily in place, I'm actually not too upset about. I think that the beast is the one of the energies you really don't want to see in the forefront for an entire week especially. Now, all of this could go together, or we might have the sunlit birth of something new and positive on the one hand, or it could be something negative, but it's hard to tell, but we'll say positive. And then lies or deceptions, about work or other issues on the other. It could be two separate things. They could all kind of morph together. Finally, we have the rune Kenosh. Now, we talked about Kenosh just a little bit before. That's the rune that appeared on Monday. And it's usually translated as a torch or a boil. And the Sawilo, the female sun at midday, which is the absolute last rune, it's beside the rune Kenosh. So we have Kenosh, and then we have Sawilo, the female sun. Usually, the female sun is thought of as strength and sometimes lightning. Her name is Suna, and she's a very strong force. She's what gives light and life to the harvest. So again, not all that different from the male concept of the sun, but just a little bit different flavor. Now, getting back to Kenosh, he looks like a sideways V, and I tend to think of it as a sideways volcano rune for that reason. As the torch, or the ancient form of light where you take a stick and you put, maybe some fat on it and you light it, it tends to bring light to murky situations, but of course you can also use it to spark off things that lead to spreading fires. I mean, again, you get this very ancient image of again, perhaps involving the beast, where, early hunters would take the torches of fire and they would use it to light small fires on the ground or bonfires to steer the beast that they wanted to hunt off of the cliff. And it may be that this Kenosh energy that started coming out on Monday and is obviously continuing into next week, this may be one of the things that is actually driving the beast away. We can only hope. In that sense, Kenosh is very, very good. Now, as the boil, or as I like to think of it, the volcano, it seems about to erupt at any moment, which is why I compare it to the volcano. It shows a situation in this case, or potentially, that hasn't gone off yet, but it's about to, or that may erupt or come to a head during the week, like that really sore boil. If you've ever had one, you know how nasty they are, because they build up, and by the end of it, you just want them to break. It's that kind of pressure that we had starting on Monday, that sadly on Monday seemed to have been manifested in one person blowing it and blowing open in a very unfortunate way. But here we see it really as an overall influence for the entire week. Now, paired with the sun and the rest of this reading, you really get the energies for some powerful fireworks if the right conditions exist for them to take place, either happening in real time on the sun itself, in the guise of, as I said, solar flares, storms, or other celestial goings-on that I might not even have thought of yet, but also in more human terms, especially those of metaphor. The sun rune, even more than the sun card, is the power of lightning. And lightning concerns electricity, and very often means the power grid or electrical manifestations or even lightning strikes in this sort of a reading. That does not mean that the sun will definitely produce a solar flare large enough to affect the power grid on Earth this week. But if it did, it would certainly be, once again, a very clear expression of this energy. Now, Sowilo also has serious aspects of all things nuclear. All the sun runes do. It just comes with them. As to a lesser degree, interestingly enough, does Kenaj, because even though it's not a solar rune, it's still fire. And in Kenaj, we see the power of eruption, like that volcano, or perhaps a bomb in the act of exploding, or even just two atoms coming together and making atomic energy. Whereas with Sowilo, it's more in the aspects of the little sun. Again, it's slightly not necessarily disruptive. You could think of it more as like it's a neutral force. It could be medicine, or it could be nuclear power. It could also be a bomb. But with Kenaj, you really get more of this exploding type of energy, which again can just be the reacting. It doesn't have to be negative, but you do have to kind of take that into account. The sun itself, solar products, and even all things nuclear have both good and bad aspects. This energy is also there for this week, and it's there for new discoveries along any of these areas. If it were not for the Liar card, this would be one of the most positive card readings we've seen in a long time since I started doing this show, and even going back to just my weblog. My hope is that a lot of the energy of this week will express itself in a more positive and helpful manner. But the Liar card, especially next to the Work card, is seldom positive. When you combine that with the Kenaj rune right after the Work card, I think you have the potential for some pretty large eruptions or possible explosions, expressions of rage, anger, resistance, or even strength on the part of those affected. The energy may result in labor strikes, a rise in the influence of labor unions, sort of a revival of sorts, a rise in the lying going on to try to keep the public from knowing the truth about the situation with labor and economic that could lead to really strong emotional reactions on both sides in the build-up to the above. The one good thing, again, is that the beast is nowhere in this reading. As energies do take a while to fade, especially when they have been front and center stage, there are hints of it in the background. But as I've said, it's already starting to pass away even now. So it's not a forefront energy anymore. Emotions, though, may still be a bit raw on the part of many people, tribes, nations. But the sun's energies in both the male and female form should be more about being strong than being actively just running around totally amok and doing uncontrolled or angry damage everywhere. That's more to beasts. The sun may shine too brightly, but the sun tends to have a more directed beam, if you get the idea. Now, this week is probably more about laying the foundations of a new situation than actually playing the whole issue out. And it feels like this may be tied to employment or work, labor in general. Money is not seen directly in this reading, but has played such a prominent role in the last couple of weeks in the daily readings that I expect it too will be an influence, especially on the liar, deception, distracted means, and the work employment related issues. Now, if you go again to my blog and look up the Friday weekend reading, which I wrote after I wrote this, you will see that today, as the day that I'm recording, today's cards and rune are all about, once again, money and deception and distraction. So I was absolutely right in feeling that situation still being there. It may not be the major, absolutely most flag influence for the entire time period, but it is certainly there, and we need to pay attention to it. So overall, look this week for stories about the sun, things related to solar power, new types of sunscreen, Indian summer or false summer, which may break out in many places, a rather pleasant aspect of the sun. We actually have that here in Ireland right now. We've gone from really cold and wet. I was even wearing a heavy sweater this morning to the sun coming out. It's mild. It's supposed to be 70 degrees tomorrow. It's a lovely, lovely last bit of summer, but we call it Indian or false summer for a reason, because it's not going to continue, obviously. At least not for very long, but it's fun while it lasts. And this, kind of heralds that period of the winds and chills of autumn before that are really going to sock in a little bit later. So again, it's kind of this herald that things are, that the weather's turning. Now, I'd be somewhat concerned about news also of droughts and extremes of heat in the southern hemisphere, which should just be moving now towards spring and summer. So, as well, again, positive things. Summer is coming, warmth is coming. It's that double edge of both good news and bad news that anything you can associate with the sun. So, look for stories also about birth, making babies, having babies, birth rates, the effect that lower or higher birth rates have on various economies, and probably the occasionally strange type of story concerning either any or all of these, and maybe even something like a new discovery that upends what was previously thought about some aspect of fertility, genetic, even things like genetic engineering can all be in energy like this. Also, again, going back to what I just said, you want to look for stories of the strange, the unusual, the different, the confounding. In a more general news, too, this is likely to be a major theme this week. It won't be the main one like it was a few weeks ago when I actually had on my blog a picture from Ripley's Believe It or Not. I don't think it's to be quite that strange. But there are going to be some interesting flips and some unexpected information, I think, coming out. And again, it won't surprise me at all if it's about the sun or possibly about birthing, because those seem to be the two really big first issues that are flagged. Now, most of all, be prepared for deceptions, distractions, falsehood, and even downright lies in the news this week, especially around anything concerning employment, jobs, wages, labor, production, or work that needs doing, like that TEPCO plant in Japan that I just mentioned, or like rebuilding projects in the Southwest or Colorado. We'll get the road done tomorrow. Yeah, it may or may not actually happen because the energy is out there for the sort of diversion and distraction big time where they tell you what they think you want to hear, and that may or may not actually be the case. Now, this is a time period when it would be very easy for an individual to be taken a ride in terms of possible employment too. So on a personal level, remember, if a job or even a job offer sounds too good to be true, it probably is. Investigate. Look at it seriously, do all the background work before you accept such an invitation. It's best to wait a few days before making a decision. On a larger scale, this is a perfect week for the sun itself, or as the sun is a metaphor, to shine a light and expose deceptive or anything false, but especially labor practices or something dodgy done by corporations or by foreign countries. Anything like that. It's very much a time when it's very explosive, This week we could also see some serious issues erupting in any of these areas that we've talked about before, including perhaps an actual volcano going off or other types of earth movements. Again, since I wrote this, we've already had a moderate-sized earthquake near Fukushima, which it's unknown yet whether it's done any damage, and of course, again, the authorities have promised they'll give us a straight answer. But again, given that liar energy, we'll just have to sort of listen and be discriminating in what we hear, basically. The torch rune may also prove to be somewhat of a foil against the liar card, because working along with the sun, it can expose hidden deceptions and lies, forcing them to the surface in a fast and not necessarily pleasant manner. A torch is what people on this side of the water actually call a flashlight. So you can think of it, the sun as being the big beam coming down and just lighting everything in its path. But the torch is where you can really go in and look in the nooks and crannies, and any sort of investigation, or even if you're an archaeologist or something this week, that's the kind of energy. It's really good for sort of like looking for hidden things. I suspect that some of this may express itself in Congress and in the legislative bodies of other countries, including Ireland, where I live, because this is the time when budgets are being finalized and hammered out, or encountering some very strange and even deceptive issues. I mean, the strange situation of the states, of course, in the United States, is this: can they keep funding the government? And the energy could play out in the new proposal, it appears to fix the whole Obamacare work situation. This thing where, because of the way the laws were written, a lot of big companies, especially those that employ a lot of lower wage people, have been making them all part-time. Now, whether this solution seems to be there and likely to actually do anything, or whether there's something false and deceptive about it, we don't know. But the fact that it's new may make it seem more acceptable. And it may also be a little bit strange and different. There's simply no way to know yet if the sun's exposing energies would open up all of these aspects of the proposal in time to really deal with it. Now, again, in the last 24 hours, we've seen both the congressional hearings on Benghazi in the U.S. and the passage, the kind of, I would say shocking, it's not really, passage of the House this afternoon of a bill that would continue to fund the U.S. government, which is currently being sort of done on continuing resolution basis. They haven't really had a budget for like nearly a year now, but it would defund the health insurance, or the Obamacare, so-called a healthcare idea. Now, obviously, this probably is not going to get past the Senate, but again, it's this rather strange and weird twist that this whole financial budget battle is taking in the U.S., and I think it reflects the energy very, very well. Similar, but not quite as drastic, things are happening in Ireland, where they're arguing with themselves or arguing with the IMF. They have till a certain date, 2 weeks from now, to actually come up with what's called a budget. And again, you're seeing all kinds of kind of really strange bedfellows and interesting energies, and it all really fits with the cards in the runes here. Again, I'm not saying any of this is actually how this is going to play out, but the energies really are there for it. Now, finally, as I mentioned before, stories about nuclear issues, especially Fukushima that I keep harping on, perhaps when it's covered up, or a new person is put in charge of work that is supposed to get done, like in this case, possibly the new prime minister. I think he's a new prime minister in Japan. I could be wrong on that. I need to look that up. So you get that comment. But that sort of idea. But new people being put in charge of various projects, which, you know, and stories about lightning, electrical power, power grid, solar power, somehow all get mixed up in this, or may sort of stand on their own, but they're definitely definites to look for this week. Now, the good thing about a time period dominated by the sun, again, is that strength of energy that we talked about before, and everyone can draw on it. The sun is powerful in both his and her aspects, both the extremes of the power of the masculine and the feminine, sometimes working together here. This makes for a very active energy period, a time to get out and do things, a time to enjoy that last spurts of Indian summer if you live in the north, and the beginning warm periods of the spring if you live in the south. Get up by going out and finishing whatever last minute plans you may have for your yard or starting new ones, gathering in the last fruits of fall or planting your garden in spring, and even enjoying a few last days of walking on the beach or the park if you're in the north, or again, you know, the last cool days before the heat starts in the south. Again, so either place, you get these sort of energies going on. The transition between cycles, basically. This energy can also help you, the individual, to be able to withstand the destructive powers of the liar card and the eruptions when they happen of the Kenosh rune, and it can join together with the torch in the Kenosh rune to light the way out of the mess the liar card is trying to create. Whatever that mess is in your life, you can call upon the sun and the Kenosh rune to help you walk through it. In this aspect, at least, the coming week is much more positive than the previous one, if nearly as highly charged, because at least the energy has a lot more positive potential. Even eruptions, even bringing things to a head can be positive. You need to get that boil to a head before you can cut it and lance it. Sunlight can be filtered, it can be blocked, it can be courted, but it does not need to be run over a cliff the way the beast does to stop it. Just like you can lance a boil, or you can, in various ways, or you can even like get out of the way of a volcano. A volcano may give you some warning that it's about to erupt, so you can evacuate. But the beast doesn't do any of those things because he's not rational. He just shows up and runs things over. The sun can shine when it wills and in daytime only, but even when the clouds, like the sun, you can't see it very well, or the night, makes you so you can't see it at all, we know that it's still there. Our ancestors may not always have known it was still there. I think they sensed it did. But there's an awful lot of folklore and rituals and traditions about things that people did to make sure the sun came back in the morning. Well, we don't generally worry about that because we know the sun is there. But this is the time period when the sun is really there and really strong. In a way, I think we can be able to feel it at night in some way. And again, it wouldn't surprise me if we had auroras in the nighttime and other sort of, things that remind us of the sun, even when we don't actually see it itself. It's been there, the sun, for a very long time. And it's likely going to still be there for a really long time to come. No matter what happens here on Earth, this may be a good week to remember that very little, if anything, is really new under the sun. And even things that may seem to be truly new, they echo things that happened in the past. The old idea that history doesn't repeat, but it rhymes. We're very much about cycles this week, and right now we're sort of again at a peak of the solar cycle. Even if the sunspots are not acting the way scientists expected them to, even if it isn't scientifically quite the peak that was expected, I really feel like energy-wise, this is a real solar peak of some sort. Now, for many millions of years, the world has managed to go on, and it goes on anyway, whether we're here or not, and I expect that can continue for a long time yet. So, whereas I think there may be something Edgar Cayce thought that the emotions of people, which would include the beast in this case, do seem to affect the sun, according to Edgar Cayce, and the great sleeping prophet, who we can talk about more at another time. So there may really, on some metaphysical level, be some interaction between the beings on Earth and their emotions and how they feel and how they conceive and how they are acting and what the sun does. Still, the sun was there a long time before us and may very well be there a long time after us, or at least a long time after we have migrated away and don't solely live just on this planet and have just this sun. So this week, basically, keep the power of your sun on your side, that incredible, gigantic, fiery force, and enjoy the warmth and the light and the strength it can bring. Just use common sense. Avoid being burned. Wear sunscreen if you've got to go out and do a festival or something. Again, sit in the shade if it's too hot. Don't be blinded by the light by staring directly at it. The sun is not something you want to look at right head on. You want to look, a torch you can look head on. You can use that canage stuff to take, your torch and look in the bright corners, but you don't look directly in the sun and hope to see anything. And above all, avoid distractions that are lurking out there to try to divert you from your personal work. That includes your own personal spiritual journeys and mental studies, as well as your actual mundane job. There's going to be tons of distraction everywhere, and all the pretty things that are going to try to keep you from seeing what the sun and the torches are trying to show you. So all in all, this is a very strongly aspected week to look forward to. Very powerful week. Could be a very intense week, but also a week when you may just get to enjoy some things as well. So not nearly as doomy as some weeks have been. Not totally wonderfully happy either, because we have that Lyra cut, unfortunately. But there may be some really positive things to look forward to. Just as always, your personal life comes first. Then pay attention to current events, because I think in this case, again, they may very well affect you. But I think this will be a week when, if you can avoid those distractions, you'll be able to really see things better for what they are. So that kind of sums up our current events reading for this week. Now it's time to sit back and go to our personal reading room, the place where the chairs are always comfy, the fire is always warm in the hearth, the candles are always lit, and the tea is exactly how you like it. And I'll join you there right after these short messages. All the music used on the show today is from musicalley.com, your source for free-to-air music for podcasts. The artists place their music up for free to air in hopes that you, the listener, will visit their site and purchase some of their outstanding musical offerings. So after the show, why not visit musicalley.com and explore their extensive playlist?
And she sings, she goes home in the evening with the dew all on her wings.
Do you have questions? The cards have answers. If you would like a personal reading with Melody, just go to my website, melodipsychicreadings.com, That's Melodi with an I, psychicreadings.com for information, or email me at melodyreader@gmail.com. Readings are available using Skype, phone, email, or even in person if you are lucky to live in Ireland. Why not find out what special messages the cards have just for you and book a private reading today?
And see me from beneath the sea, the best in all of Ireland. See me from beneath the sea, the best in all of Ireland.
Welcome back to part 2 of Cat's Eye on the Future. Now, this is the time when we go into our virtual reading room and we look at a personal question that's been sent in by one of our listeners. Usually it's a personal question, but it can involve current events. I give people that choice. And today's personal question is actually another current events question. I've actually been hanging on to this one for several weeks, and I've been wanting to look at it, but because it's kind of a potentially doom-laden question, and a lot of the weekly forecasts had been kind of downers, I didn't want to add any more doomy potentials to that. So I waited till this week when we had the sun energy, and being the sun in the 4, things may be somewhat less gloomy and upsetting in places than it was previous weeks. Because we have that strong, warm energy of the sun to counteract the Liar card and help things make just a bit more cheerful, in general. So because of that, I decided it was a great time to finally go ahead and look at another question from our friend Plain, who, by the way, has another excellent radio show here on the Time Monk Radio Network called The Plain Truth. That's Plain, spelled Plane, like the aircraft. Be sure to listen to his show. If you enjoy my show, I know you'll like his a lot. Anyway, Plain asked this question. He would like to know, how will fracking affect the UK? Now, first off, what is fracking? Fracking is a process that I don't even totally understand myself, but it's a way of extracting oil from the ground that's kind of new and controversial, where water is pumped into the stonework way far in the ground. It pushes oil up that otherwise might be irretrievable. This sounds absolutely fantastic in theory, and it does seem to actually work in practice. But a lot of people question how it may be affecting other things like geology, stability of the land, water tables, this sort of thing. So it's a really good question. Now, the thing about this question, though, is that it's pretty general. It doesn't set any time frames. It doesn't specify what part of the UK that we're going to look at. However, I think I'm going to try it this first time anyway, just the way it is. Because sometimes you get some really interesting stuff when you do that. We've done that a couple of times before now. Usually we try to be really much more specific. But sometimes we just expand it open and see what we get. And I want to try that this week as an experiment. It's always possible to narrow and go back and ask further questions. But sometimes it's fun just to see what the cards and runes come up with, even when you ask about a really wide topic. So let's see just exactly what the cards and runes have come up with, shall we? Again, if you want to follow at home, these cards will be on episode 18. I will try to describe them. And at this point, I also want to say that there are 40 cards in this deck. We keep seeing the same ones over and over again, not because I'm not shuffling them, but because, well, they're manifesting the energies, or at least I believe they're manifesting the energies that are out there. So that's just a word of caution. There are more cards than we're seeing, but we do have a tendency to see repeated cards during particularly the same extended time period. Anyway, we do seem to have some interesting suggestions from the cards and the runes on how fracking may affect the UK. But the first thing I noticed looking at these cards is we don't have any directly negative or positive indications of how these will play out. We don't have any yes cards, no cards, never cards, or even kind of cautionary runes here. But we do have some subject matters to look at, and I'm going to explore them now. If you're following along at home again, you can see that the first card is the father. This is the father. He's showing his son how and where to point his arrow. They're both in kind of tribal costumes. This is a long time ago. He's teaching his son probably how to hunt or maybe warrior skills, either to help support his family or possibly defensive to defend his family when he grows up, or maybe even in military warfare to go make war on other tribes. We just don't know because the card doesn't say, so you have to go with context. But once again, this card is the foundation card of the reading. It's going to color everything that comes after it. Now we have to remember that this card also tends to symbolize patriarchal power. The father, dictating from above what will happen, control. He targets situations. He tries to tell his family what to do. A good father does this in a very gentle and loving way. A not so great father may decide to become sort of, master dictator of the universe. And I think most fathers are probably somewhere in between. But all of these situations can be in this card. And my feeling is that this card suggests, in the case of fracking, that for now, this is kind of the shot across the bow with that bow and arrow, that the fathers, probably the Tories in this case and their friends, the people in power in the UK at the moment, have decided that the UK will use in order to try to take care of its children, or tell them, this is what you're going to do. No matter what their opinion may actually be on this subject, this is going to be, they're taking the bow in the hand and they're showing the kids where to point. They've decided this is the way to go, and for now, that's what they plan to do, come heck or high water. Now, the next card is the ship or the voyage. And that's why I saw these sort of arrows shooting across the bow. That's why I use that imagery. Because literally, when you see the two cards together, it looks like the arrow's about to be shot right over the ship. I also think the voyage card, it represents directly the path the UK sort of ship of state, which this card can also represent, is choosing to sail. So the UK ship of sail is choosing to sail in the direction of fracking for now. It also suggests that this action is either promoted or will be affected, I think, by the North Sea oil fields, which are that huge resources of oil that were found off the coast of Scotland. That's really kept the UK going as a world power, such as it still is, for the last few decades. There are rumors and some evidence that that oil field is lowering in production, which of course would lead the UK to be looking for other sources of energy. And well, I'm sure the North Sea oil fields are a concern, either because of those Dinley supplies, or maybe even because of a possible succession by Scotland from the UK. It does feel like the fracking and the North Sea is really important in all of this. They seem to be combined together in some way. There are also hints here that the UK itself may hope to become a producer, or perhaps even a shipper or supplier of oil in the future. There's certainly no one way or another that is definitely shown, but it could occur to them that this might be a good or an interesting idea. And that's kind of, again, the image of the voyage card, cargo or the oil tanker going out. I think at this moment it's kind of a fantasy, but it is maybe something out there in the water that they'd be hoping to accomplish and achieve. But no matter what the outcome, again, it looks like this is the, with a capital T, path the fathers with a capital F are set on. One that could change later if a change of government occurred, but right now, that's what certainly looks to be the case. Now, the next card, attention to some possible consequences of this. We finally get some information about what may happen instead of just why and what is happening. And that's the body card. Remember the creepy card, the one that looks sort of like a body in an old dissection book. My husband, the medical school student, doesn't understand why other people consider this a creepy card, but most people consider the picture of a half-dissected human body to be a bit creepy. But it usually symbolizes either the human body itself, obviously, or the health of that body, along with sometimes the material world, or in rare cases even the body of the earth itself. So you get the concept of bodies of things, bodies of planets, bodies of objects. So we have all of these here in this card. In this reading, I think we find elements of everything that I've just mentioned. The implication being there will be consequences for human bodies in terms of health, the material world, bodies in the material world and the world itself. Perhaps in terms of like energy usage, it'll affect people, both positively and negatively, probably, especially at first. And probably the effects on the health of the earth itself. Again, those questions about what happens when you start pumping water in to rocks where water hasn't been before. What does to push out an element that's in there? What happens when you do that? I'm drawn to the outstretched hand on the body card that sometimes suggests the word stop. However, what needs to stop is not exactly stated by the card, but this may be a warning of sorts. I've seen that with this card before. But I have to admit, I could just be reading my own personal opinions into this, because, and that's something a honest psychic has to take into account. I mean, I will be very upfront about it. I'm very disturbed by the idea of the mass usage of this technology anywhere in the world, because until we learn more about what it does to the foundations and the geology and the health of water and such. But I'm continuing to try to read, and I will try to honestly point out things that may be positive as well as not just dwell on the negatives, although keep in mind that is my opinion that I come into this reading with. However, in any case, it looks like this course, whatever, it will have a direct impact on the bodies and lives of people. Again, we can't be for sure positively or negatively. The card does not say, but it says that there will be an impact. It may also affect personal and international friendships. In terms of personal friendships, I think it's already doing that now. We have the friendship card right here. In the friendship card is a number of people sitting around a table together. They're very, very close and intimate. There may be a fourth friend coming into the picture. We don't know if they're going to sit down or if they're actually going to another table. But you have this idea of friends and possibly strangers interacting in a friendly way, a potentially friendly way. Now, I know that people are getting very divided on this issue. I have a lot of friends in the UK, and I see this as a huge issue on Facebook. Most of the people I know actually think this is a very dumb idea and are not really happy about it. But not everyone's of that mindset. So it's like any divisive issue. It can tend to throw people both into and out of friendships, groups, alliances. It can demolish old ones, form new ones. And I think this is part of this card, is that it's going to be a very divisive issue, especially as time goes on. Again, both people who appreciate the fact that there may be a lot more oil suddenly, that, particularly if the government lets the prices go down. A lot of the UK gasoline or petrol, for example, is extremely high priced. Even in Ireland, we tend to pay like $10 a gallon to drive, and people just, when you have prices that high, a lot of things just don't happen, and it has a knock-on effect on industry. The way our society is set up, it pretty much runs on oil. So there may be a lot of people that actually like that once they find out that is one of the consequences, if it is. On the other hand, you're going to have a lot of other people who may continue to think this is a really dumb idea, become increasingly more concerned, especially if evidence comes out that there are problems. And this is really, really, really going to affect friendships and even has the potential even to split families apart. I mean, it's one of those really divisive things. However, when you get to an international scale, I think the UK will see both good and bad reactions from allies, just like you see that among friends in the personal level. Some countries like the US are going to think this technology is fabulous, and they're going to likely to try and team up with the UK if the fracking in oil and gas actually turn out to be profitable. I think you may see that kind of an alliance, and again, possibly even encouraging the UK to move part of away from the rest of Europe, particularly if they also are sort of cautious on this energy, and the UK is not. Hard to tell yet. We're not reading for the EU. We're just reading for the UK. But I also suspect that places like Ireland and other nearby countries may also be looking for ways to get in on the action, so to speak, depending on the government of the day and the public mood at the time. Ireland is a much smaller country, and they have to some degree, react to the way the public mood is. And right now, the public mood tracking is pretty hostile. But again, possibly that could change, especially depending on the situation and what's happening. Now, I suspect the UK may also use any resources it manages to gain by this to try and influence countries already within its sphere of friendships. Again, Ireland and England have a really traumatic past, but they actually tend to go a lot in lockstep with their laws and things because they share a common border and a lot of a common, pretty much economic area. It's not totally integrated, but it's very influenced, and it's really hard for one island to totally avoid doing what the other island is doing. So Ireland is going to get caught up in here, as are some of the other places the UK influences heavily. And they may also use it the UK may use fracking as a bargaining chip with dealing with some other countries. This feels somewhat in the future, and I think it may be as much a hoped-for outcome as an actual one, again, on the part of the current government. But again, my own feelings may be getting in the way here. But I do sort of get this sense that some of the, particularly the current government, may be kind of looking at fracking as a way towards what they perceive of fossil fuel energy independence for the UK, and that may in some way help expand, for lack of a better term, the old empire, the old British Empire. I don't know that that's exactly what's going on. I don't know that it's actually going to happen, but I think that's what they're thinking about with this whole friendship meme. Now, the last information we get on this topic for now anyway is the Daguj rune again. And it may have several ways in which it relates to the cards. Daguj, we've seen this rune before several times. It's the sun at dawn, or the rising sun. It's being a solar rune, it also has aspects of both solar and, of course, nuclear power, as well as things like electrical grids and even other power sources. Ultimately, Daguj and the sun itself, which remember is kind of the theme for this next week, they help make oil. At least some of the oil is obviously, we know, is made from dead animals. There are controversies and maybe other ways the earth also produces oil, but essentially the sun is an important factor here. Being the morning rune, however, Daguj also signals the start of something new, a new chapter or a new day or even a new cycle. It also has a certain amount of things dawning on people. People become aware of things. Again, it's like the idea of the sun revealing things, or even the moon, but it's not as subtle as the moon, but it's not as shocking and in your face as the sun when it shines on something. It's a little more gradual. So we have that growing awareness of it. And I think there's several potentials here. Despite the fact that I hate the idea, it could be the technology of fracking may enter a new dawn for the UK in terms of technology, or at least energy self-sufficiency, even if temporarily. They may become self-sufficient or really increase their energy production. Or I like this interpretation a little bit better. Perhaps the fracking will be used as a temporary stepping stone to tide things over while solar energy is improved, or even perhaps a new form of nuclear energy like fusion reactors, which may be a lot safer than the current versions, can be used to replace it. It could also mean, though, that as time goes on, some of the issues around fracking and its aftermath, things like possible earthquakes, land subsidence like sinkholes, possible water contamination that may start to show up, it may start to dawn on the public and other even officials that this could affect the friendship between those in charge and the general public, especially if things start to be affecting the bodies of both humans and the earth. It might even affect their interactions with other countries and allies if it looks at that kind of damage could be more than just localized. Once you start playing around with things like the earth itself, an earthquake one place might lead to an earthquake somewhere else. You mess up the water table in one area, it may also mess up the water table in other areas. For example, because we share an island, if, for example, the part of the UK that's currently in Northern Ireland were to contaminate their water, it would not stop automatically at the border. It would also affect the Irish Republic. And it's that kind of spillover that I think you may start seeing if this occurs. Now, I also think there's a very strong hint here with the Daguj rune that one reason the UK government is so full steam on the fracking option was that until really recently, UK governments, not just the current one, but the one before this, were determined to go nuclear in a big way. There'd been numerous TV commercials and announcements and television programs about how new nuclear plants were simply going to be built. To oppose them was being anti-science. Didn't matter, the public didn't understand, the money was already budgeted, the bids were being taken on, the land was being selected, it was going to happen, otherwise the entire UK would be in the dark, and the nanny state was of course going to make this decision, and England was going, and the UK were going to be back to nuclear power. Then the Fukushima disaster happened. In the land of the rising sun, again we have the Daguj rune. This caused all of Europe to do an instant double take on nuclear power, with some countries like Germany, who already had really extensive or fairly extensive nuclear power plants and relied on it for their power grid. They decided they were going to dismantle their existing reactors Some countries, like Sweden, just became a bit more cautious. I don't really know where they stand at the moment, but they're being a very cautious country. I think they're looking at safety issues and ways perhaps to improve and deal with the plans they already have, and maybe take stock before they make any more for the future. Other countries, like Ireland, that never had any nuclear power plants of their own and there's a certain amount of public hostility to it, that limited public hostility became much stronger than it was before. So the UK government was caught in the pinchers after a few weeks of back and forth once Fukushima happened. The issue of new UK nuclear power plants pretty much fell off the public news cycles once it became really obvious. It took about a year or so for this to totally disappear, but once it became so obvious that the Japanese disaster was ongoing, it was going to be in the news for years, if not decades. Unlike Chernobyl, people just couldn't cover it up with cement and walk away. They finally realized the public would simply not stand for any more nuclear power plants, at least not right now. And probably not during the lifetime of the current government, for sure. So bowing to public opinion on the one hand, I think and again, here you got the father meme again, and this includes women as well. This is an energy, not a gender. It's that kind of authoritarian, we will do what is good for you because we know better, have decided that their only, in quotes here, only choice, alternative to nuclear power is using water to bust into rocks to get oil, especially with the threats and problems towards the North Sea oil fields, both in terms of lowering production and that pesky idea that Scotland's going to have a referendum and they may become an independent country and take the oil fields, what's left of them, with them. So in that way, the nuclear accident in Japan that Dagujerun had a heavy influence on what is taking place now in the UK, which is the increasing use of fracking technology, even in the face of growing public opposition, or at least concern. A lot of people that aren't necessarily extremely negative about it are becoming concerned about it, and they want to know more. And generally when they learn more, they're continuing to be concerned. Ultimately, it does not look like this decision will affect the body of the nation, the population, and possibly the Earth itself. I mean, it will affect, these things. But for right now, the UK government is going to do its best to put a friendly face on the technology. And I suspect start presenting it as soon as a matter of national security. We must have this, along with making the public the only other choice is nuclear power plants. What do you want? Do you want to be Fukushima, or do you want to be scientific and drill? These arguments have happened in the past under similar situations, but I think you see where this is likely to be heading. When in reality, many of those in power would love to have both systems if they thought they could get away with it. Because, again, both of them appear to give some energy independence. They continue the older technology, and they pretty much would let the governments do what they were already planning on anyway. So we don't really know the long-term effects of fracking technology in the UK yet. Certainly we don't from this reading. Other than that, they are likely to affect a number of issues in the short run, and they're not likely to stop fracking anytime soon. At least not unless forced to by some major disaster like the one that happened in Japan, only probably more geological or water-wise. It's possible that the dawning public awareness of health and geological issues could change this intensity of decision to use this technology. But again, I think that whereas in the long run we know it's going to affect health and the bodies of people, I think it's just going to be slow enough that for now the UK is just going to keep going on the way it's going, short of some catastrophic thing happening fairly quickly. Now this question is probably worth looking at again after the election cycle in the UK, because if opposition continues to mount, people in the UK can and do vote out their governments with quite a deal of regularity. It's not like Italy where you have sort of the government of the month club, but there is this tendency to go back and forth, at least between the two major parties. And sometimes also, because it's a parliamentary system, smaller parties can have a great deal of influence. So you might get an actual, say, anti or a pro-fracking party that might be that's their major issue, and they may get a certain number of constituencies. And whereas on their own, they might be pretty lame or unable to do anything. Unlike in the US, where a party like that is just kind of almost a laughing stock. In the UK, just about any party, if they can form a coalition with a larger party because they have to have enough seats for what's called form a government. I know this is redundant for people who understand it if you're in Canada or England, but it may be useful to people in the U.S. to realize this is why governments in the UK can even be voted out of office midterm. It isn't like a U.S. president or a congressperson where once they get elected, they know, short of illness or being impeached, they're there for 2 years or 4 years or 6 years, whatever the term is, and no one can touch them. In the UK, that is not the case. So, I think we should look at the next election cycle to see what's happening. And if somebody will remind me, I'll try to remember to read on this question again, because it may change things. That may be why we're not getting any definites one way or the other. It may depend on how this technology is used, whether it's just used for a short period of transition, while other things are looked at to replace it, whether it be, solar and wind power, or possibly some of the rumored about sort of black ops, things like zero gravity or other technologies, whatever could be coming into place, and then it would possibly make this question completely redundant. I don't think this is something likely to be going on if it was no longer profitable. Right now it is profitable, or it's perceived as being profitable for some people, and those seem to be people in power, and they seem to want it to go on. So for now, it probably will. Remember, if you would like your personal question or personal issue on current events used here on the air, you could just contact me by email at melodyreader@gmail.com. That's Melody with an I. And I'll see if I can get it up on the show for you. I really love the questions readers send in because they're different, and they're not necessarily the same things I would choose to look at. Like, even though this is a very hot topic over here, I would never have thought about just reading to see what the responses or reactions or situations might be of fracking in one particular country. It was somebody hadn't asked me directly. So, please do send me questions. The only thing is no legal or health questions, but most other stuff is pretty fair game. And I really encourage the interesting stuff. It isn't too odd. You can go ahead and send it to me anyway, and I'll look at it and I'll get back to you. Particularly if I use it on the air. But for now, I think it's time. I think we're at the end of the show. I'm getting tired, and I suspect everybody else is too. It's time to blow the candles out here in the reading room, pick up the empty teacups and take them off the table, get up out of that comfy chair, and leave the reading room until next week. But for now, I hope you enjoyed this week's show. I certainly enjoyed it, and I'm really looking forward to meeting you again next time. So stay tuned and take care, and I'll see you then.
But here's a health to the company, and one to my lass.
You have been listening to Cat's Eye on the Future, the show where we take a glimpse of the energies coming soon into your world and into your future. Be sure to join us again next time when we explore another chapter of Cat's Eye on the Future.
Again, but here's a health to the company, and one to my last. Let's drink